She was barefoot, bleeding, and screaming his name as thunder cracked over the hills. On their wedding night, he locked her inside the cabin and walked toward the men sent to kill her, not with her at his side, but alone. But these weren't angry townsfolk. These were soldiers. His kind. And what she didn't know yet was that the symbol she carried, the one that destroyed her family, was once sewn into his chest. So now, the question isn't just why he locked the door. It's whether he ever planned to open it again. Wind shrieked like a dying animal across the plains, dragging sheets of rain sideways as thunder pealed through the valley with the weight of judgment. The sky had opened like a wound. A jagged fork of lightning cracked above the ridgeline, silhouetting the old cabin where her fists slammed against the heavy oak door, again and again, slick with blood and rain. Her white dress clung to her skin in shredded ribbons, stained with mud, sweat, and something darker. Before we uncover the secrets hidden behind that locked cabin door, and the truths buried beneath blood vows, scorched cloth, and silent rifles, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep telling the stories others left behind, the ones etched in ash, carried on the wind, and whispered by those who chose to protect, even when it cost them everything. Every subscription helps us return to the places where judgment was passed too soon, and where maybe, just maybe, redemption is still possible. What you do here might seem small, but for the forgotten, for the misjudged, it matters more than you know. Thank you. Behind her, hoofbeats approached, slow at first, deliberate, like the tightening grip of a noose. "You promised," she cried, voice cracking under the roar of the storm. She wasn't pleading, she was demanding. Desperate, yes, but not broken. Inside, the warrior sat motionless, back pressed to the far wall, rifle propped upright between his knees. One bullet chambered, one breath held. The fire had gone out hours ago, but the cabin still reeked of pine smoke and gun oil. Candlelight flickered low on a nearby table, casting shadows across the scars that mapped his face. He hadn't moved in minutes. He hadn't spoken in longer. He heard her. Every word. Every sob that wasn't a sob. He heard the gravel tear beneath hooves as they neared. He heard the voice of the past riding in on saddle leather and metal buckles, the unmistakable cadence of men who didn't knock. They took. The door shook beneath her weight as she pounded harder. "Open it, damn you!" Her nails clawed the wood like she could splinter it with grief alone. The key, the one he had once pressed into her palm, promising safety, always, was now gone. Taken back, turned, locked from the outside. Another flash lit the hills this time, revealing movement. A half-circle of riders, silent but certain, descending like wolves in formation. Black coats, covered faces, no torches. They didn't want to be seen. Not until it was too late. Inside, the warrior's jaw clenched. Rain drummed on the tin roof above like war drums. He tightened his grip on the rifle, then loosened it. A drop of sweat slid down his temple, trailing the edge of an old burn. His lips moved without sound. Outside, she pressed her ear to the door, whispering now, "They're coming. They'll kill me. Or worse." A pause. A breath. "You said you'd keep me safe." Another silence. "You said I was your choice." His eyes shut tight. Not from fear. Not from guilt. From memory. A fire-lit night. A promise spoken over joined hands. A knife buried in soil to mark a vow that could not be broken. But here he sat, gun loaded, not for them, but for the thing inside him that wouldn't die unless it was ended. The riders reached the fence line. Their horses didn't whinny. Trained beasts. Trained men. One dismounted slowly, reached for something under his coat. Not a gun. A token. Familiar. Too familiar. "Please," she said one last time, voice no louder than the wind's whisper through broken rafters. He stood. Not toward the door, not toward her voice, but toward the single candle, toward the rifle, and toward the silence he thought he could outlive. The sun had not yet burned off the dawn mist when he saw the vultures circling low above the ridge. 3 slow loops in silence, too tight for cattle, too soon for death by hunger. He adjusted the strap on his rifle and nudged his horse toward the scent of smoke curling faintly over the hill crest. The prairie was quiet, too quiet for a place where life had recently screamed. The wagon was split in two, like a jaw cracked down the middle. One wheel dangled uselessly, axle snapped. Scattered goods told the story plainly. No robbery, just pursuit. No attempt to salvage. Just fire, and then flight. Or worse. Then he saw her, face down in the grass, half covered by a piece of canvas that had once been the wagon's roof. Her hands still clenched something, a strip of fabric, soaked in sweat, and something darker, edges frayed like it had been torn from a larger hole. The symbol on it stopped him cold. A sigil he hadn't seen in years, not since he left the unit, not since the war that wasn't called a war. Not since the orders he didn't follow. She twitched. He dismounted in one fluid motion and knelt beside her, breath shallow, but there. Skin burned from the sun, lips split. She wasn't going to make it if left out another hour. He glanced back at the trail. Too far from town. Too many eyes in town. Too many men with memories and suspicions. And if she was being hunted as that cloth suggested, they'd be watching the roads. He didn't think long. He never did when it came to the broken ones, not since the boy. Scooping her into his arms, he grunted under the weight, lighter than he expected, all bone and dirt, and a tremble like the earth was still shaking inside her. Her fingers tightened around the cloth even in unconsciousness, knuckles white with the grip of someone who had already lost everything else. He rode hard, keeping off main trails, his hat pulled low, her head resting against his shoulder. The ride was long. The wind picked up, dust coated everything, but he didn't stop. Not until the cabin emerged out of the horizon like a secret carved from pine and rock. No one found it unless he wanted them to. She didn't wake until the second night. He was boiling water when she stirred, eyes wild and unfocused. Her voice cracked like old parchment. Did they follow? He turned. She tried to sit, winced, then fell back against the cot. Her hand went straight for the cloth. He approached slowly. You're safe. No, she rasped. I'm not. Not until I'm off the map. That phrase, off the map, not just a metaphor, a command he remembered too well. He saw her face fully now, bruises fading into yellow, a cut above her brow, but beneath it, clarity. She wasn't just running. She was escaping something structured, organized, the kind of men who wore uniforms without names. He handed her a tin cup. She sipped, eyes not leaving his. Why help me? She asked. He didn't answer. Just walked to the door, stared out at the empty distance, and locked the bolt. Not to keep her in. To keep everything else out. They gathered just before dusk, when the town's shadows grew long and mean. Dust blew in restless spirals down the main street as boots shuffled, shoulders pressed close, and hands hovered near holsters not drawn, not yet. Suspicion had bloomed like rot since word got out that the woman had been brought in by him. Not to the church, not to the law, to his place miles out, behind no name and behind no fence but his own silence. She's marked, someone muttered. The word traveled like a contagion. The cloth, same as the old unit, same as the raids. Could be bait, another spat. Could be they're circling, just waitin' for a reason. The saloon emptied. The blacksmith's hammer stopped. Even the preacher leaned on the rail outside the chapel, saying nothing. The town didn't need consensus. It had momentum. And tonight, that momentum pointed toward exile. By the time they reached the south gate, he was already there, leaning against the post like a monument. Arms crossed, rifle at rest by his side, but not out of reach. His coat whipped slightly in the wind, and his eyes scanned them, not fast, not aggressive, just counting. The woman stood behind him, pale, still recovering, but upright. Her hands trembled, fingers once again clutching that frayed cloth. She had offered to stay hidden, but he said no. Better they see who they're judging. The marshal stepped forward, graying at the beard now, but the badge still caught light. "We don't want blood, Hawk," he said, using the name like it was both a warning and a plea. "But this ain't a place for her kind." "And what kind is that?" Hawk asked, voice low, steady. "She's got ties. You saw the mark. You know what it means. Hell, you wore it once." "I tore it off." "Some didn't." Silence swelled between them like a storm cloud about to split. Behind the marshal, a figure shifted, tall, younger, wearing the same boots as his father but none of the patience. The marshal's son, grin curled like barbed wire. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His hand rested openly on his belt, thumb teasing the buckle like he was already imagining the draw. Hawk stepped forward, not fast, but final, his boots planted in the dirt between her and the town. "She stays under my roof," he said, each word measured like hammer strikes. "My word holds. She ain't your blood. My word still holds." Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. The preacher shifted. The blacksmith muttered. "He never broke his word." "Not once." A few nodded. "Not many. But enough." The marshal's jaw tightened, but he raised a hand, signaling retreat. The crowd thinned, reluctant but obedient for now. But the marshal's son didn't move, not until Hawk's eyes met his and stayed there. He held that stare a beat too long, then finally turned, spitting into the dust as he walked off. "Word won't save her when they come," he muttered. Hawk didn't answer, just watched until the gate was empty again. That night, back at the cabin, she asked why he'd done it. He stared at the fire a long time before answering. "Because once, someone gave me shelter. And someone else burned it down." He looked at her then, eyes like dry flint. "I won't let that happen twice." The hills glowed orange long before the smoke reached them. Pinpricks of fire had bloomed across the ridgelines, controlled burns, lit in silence. No shouting, no celebration, just a signal, one they both recognized. Inside the cabin, she stood by the window, fingers brushing the edge of the curtain like it might catch fire next. Her dress hung stiff on her frame, the pale muslin dulled by dust and blood that hadn't fully washed out. A ring, too large for her finger, slid loose as she gripped the sill. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sure. "Will they come?" He didn't look up, just snapped open the breech of the second rifle, slid a cartridge in smooth and hard, then another. Click. Click. Precision as ritual, as memory, as penance. She turned to face him. "You said marrying me would make them back off, that it would bind you to me legally." "It does," he said, without meeting her eyes. "In town, on paper. And out there?" Her gaze cut toward the hills. "They don't care about paper." He finally looked up, eyes like steel tempered in regret. "No," he said. "They don't." He moved past her, brushing her shoulder without softness, and placed the loaded rifle near the door. 2 rifles now, one for each hand, or one for each target. The room smelled of oil, of iron, of sweat held too long beneath armor he no longer wore, but never really took off. She followed him outside, where the wind had quieted just enough to carry sound. Far off, the cackle of a fire line snapped like whips across the valley. Somewhere nearer, a horse snorted, restless, as if it could feel the pressure building in the soil beneath them. "They're testing distance," he murmured, scanning the ridges, "seeing how close they can get before someone calls it a threat." "And if no one calls it?" He said nothing, just took a seat on the edge of the porch, laid his hand across the stock of the older rifle. The one with notches on the grip, each a memory, or a cost. She sat beside him, not touching, but not far. Her voice was quieter now, like she was asking it of herself. Why the wedding, really? He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. The fire popped. Then he said, because it was the only thing I could offer that they'd have to respect, even if they hated it. My word's worth less than it used to be. But law they still bend to. She studied him. You think names and rings will keep them off? No, he said, but it buys time, and time gets us options. Her hand brushed the hem of the dress. What happens when time runs out? They come. And someone worse? He didn't look at her when he said it. They send him when the rest fail. Her blood ran cold. She'd heard stories, only stories, but enough to know what he meant. A man who didn't light fires, he walked into them. A cleaner, a finisher. No uniform, just a purpose. And he never missed what he was sent to erase. A gust of wind carried the crackle of laughter from the hills, not joyful, just cruel. As if someone up there already knew the end. She stood. If he comes, you can't stop him. He looked at her then, face like carved granite. No, but I can make damn sure he doesn't leave. And just like that, the night swallowed them again. Cabin lit only by the embers of a vow forged too late and a war reigniting around them. The sound of the key turning echoed louder than the wind, louder than the creaking wood, louder than her breath catching in her throat. She spun, too late to catch him. The door shut with a finality that didn't need a bang. Just the cold, deliberate snick of the lock sliding into place. She stood in silence, still in the wedding dress loosened at the collar, dusted from the walk back from the chapel, the hem stained where she'd knelt earlier beside the fire to heat water. She hadn't even unpinned her hair. The braids had started to fall, but she hadn't touched them. "Hawk?" she said, her voice uncertain. Then louder. "Hawk?" "Nothing." She ran to the door, jiggled the handle, pounded once. The window offered nothing but blackness and the smear of lightning on far hills. The candlelight flickered behind her, throwing her shadow against the log wall, making her look like a figure already halfway to legend trapped in a home that had been promised as sanctuary. Out there, boots whispered against rock. No gallop, no charge. Just the silent rhythm of men who didn't need to rush. He stood halfway up the ridge, coat swept back behind the grip of his pistol, a rifle slung loose across his back. No cover, no barricade, just him. His breath misted in the night, and his hand hung low near his belt, not itching, just ready. They crested the hill in formation. Not townsfolk, not vigilantes. These men rode with precision, clean leather, steel buttons, faces like stone tablets, cold, memorized, unreadable. He recognized the lead rider before the others came into view. It had been over a decade, but the posture hadn't changed. Neither had the voice. Return her. 2 words, that was all. The man didn't raise his weapon, didn't even dismount. He didn't need to. His presence was the warning. The insignia stitched into his collar gleamed wet under the lightning, a symbol long buried, long denied, but never fully erased. Hawk's voice was quiet, but every syllable carried like a blade through fog. She's under my protection. That protection was revoked when you broke rank. She's not a target, she's a witness. A liability. She knows enough to be afraid, not enough to betray. She's marked, you know what that means. I know what it used to mean. The man on horseback tilted his head slightly, as if considering something already decided. This isn't about then, this is about now. Return her, or we proceed under mandate. Behind the locked door, she had pressed her ear against the wood. The voices were distant, but familiar in tone. They spoke in phrases she'd heard before, orders disguised as options. Choices that weren't really choices at all. She stepped back, heart pounding. Why hadn't he let her speak? Why hadn't he explained? The cabin had been shelter. The marriage had been shield. But now it felt like a cage. Was it to protect her from them? Or was it to keep her from saying what he feared she already knew? Outside, thunder cracked again, followed by silence. Inside, she whispered to the dark, "Whose side are you on, Hawk?" The screen goes black. A single line burns into view. Was the lock for her safety, or his shame? She sat in silence for what felt like hours, watching the candle burn low. The flame sputtered, dancing shadows over the log walls, tracing lines across the floor like scars. Her fingers toyed absently with the brass casing she'd found near the hearth, spent long ago, but still solid, still sharp along one edge. The door had stopped rattling under her fists. She'd screamed herself hoarse. Now, silence had settled over the cabin like dust. Still, waiting, listening. She pressed the bullet casing into the gap beside the latch, testing angles, sliding metal against wood. Her hands shook, not from fear anymore, but purpose. Each scrape was a defiance. Each creak a reclaiming of breath. Finally, a soft crack. The mechanism shifted. The door inched open. She slipped through before it could groan. Outside, only wind. No gunfire, no shouting. Just the night, bloated and ominous, stretching across the land like a held breath. She moved fast, but quiet, stepping around the porch boards she knew creaked, ducking back inside through the storage entrance where he thought she'd never look. His study was dark. He never lit it when she was near, but she remembered the floorboard he covered too carefully with that woven rug, the one frayed only at the corners. She lifted it. It wasn't locked. There, beneath the plank, wrapped in old oilskin, was the truth. First came the letters, paper yellowed, but ink still legible. Coordinates, names, strike orders, surveillance reports. Not scavenged, not stolen. Authored. His handwriting. His authorization. Then came the maps. Folded and refolded, marked with circles and arrows. A route through borderless terrain. A trail of flames and disappearances. Villages that no longer had names. And then the tokens, 4 black pins, polished and smooth, shaped like the insignia on the cloth she still carried. The same insignia that had gotten her family burned out. That had marked her mother's door before the raid. That had turned her into a fugitive. He had worn it. Not just once. Not as a conscript. He had commanded beneath it. She stumbled back from the pile, air thick in her chest. Her mouth was dry, her hands shaking. She pressed her palms to the floor to steady herself. He hadn't saved her. He had spared her. A choice. A moment. A shift in loyalty, but only after he'd helped build the fire that consumed everyone else. Was the marriage mercy, or was it guilt? She stood, cradling the letters against her chest like they might burst into flame. Outside, in the distance, a gunshot cracked singular and final. Then another. Not aimed at her, not yet. But something had begun. She looked once more at the evidence scattered across the floor, then to the door he had locked behind her. She had thought he was a shield. But he had been the blade all along. The dawn came red. Not gold, not pink, not the soft promise of morning. It came like a warning, bleeding across the sky as if the land itself already knew what was about to unfold. Smoke still coiled in thin lines from the hills, but now there were more shapes moving beneath it. Horses. Dozens. A slow, deliberate tightening of the circle. The cabin was the eye of the storm, and everything else had begun to spin. She stood in the doorway, eyes hollow with everything she had uncovered the night before. The letters still lay in the study, scattered like ash. The insignia was in her hand now, no longer clutched in fear, but gripped in open challenge. She'd tied it to a broken stick from the porch railing, a makeshift flag, a call, a curse, A question. And she walked. Barefoot, slow, toward the line of riders now forming beyond the fence. Men in coats without names. Uniforms that bore only one mark. The same mark she held up, now tattered and fluttering in the morning wind. They saw her before they saw him. She made sure of that. A murmur passed through the ranks, like wind rustling dry grass. Some drew reins tighter. Some looked to their leader. The man dismounted tall, deliberate, and quiet. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't need to. His authority came from something older than fear, from command, from history. She didn't flinch. Her arms shook, but her spine stayed straight. Behind her, the cabin door opened. The warrior stepped out. He held no weapon. It was the only way this wouldn't end in fire. At least not yet. His face was unreadable. But he stopped a few paces behind her, not beside. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak. He just watched the line of soldiers, the men he once called brothers, watch her. The leader took 3 steps forward. The silence was total. "You know what that means," he said, eyes locked on the cloth. She nodded. "Do you?" A pause. "I helped bury the ones who carried it. Then you know they weren't all the same." The man's gaze slid past her to Hawk. "He trained under me. We both know what side he stood on." "No," she said, louder now. "You think you know. But sides change. People change." The man almost smiled. "People die." And then a voice. Small, clear, impossible. "But not all of them stay dead." Heads turned. A child stepped from the gathered crowd of watchers along the road. Couldn't have been more than 10. Freckled, boots too big, a boy from town. No one had seen him move through the ranks. He just appeared. Like truth often does uninvited. He pointed at the symbol she held. "That mark don't mean what it used to," he said. "It means who stood up when no one else did." The wind stopped. Someone shifted in their saddle. Another lowered his rifle just an inch. The leader didn't speak. His eyes narrowed. The tension was a blade. One breath, and it would snap. But the ranks had changed. One rider pulled off his glove. Another loosened his grip. Cracks. Small, but visible. And in that crack, something larger began to breathe. Not mercy. Not yet. But possibility. The flames were low, flickering with that uneasy dance of coals too long untended, as if unsure whether to die or reignite. She stood before them, holding the insignia high above the fire pit. Her hands were steady now. The trembling had passed somewhere between revelation and resolve. Wind tugged at her hair, caught the frayed ends of the cloth like it, too, knew what was coming. Around her, the crowd had thickened, townsfolk on one side, riders on the other, no longer separate in distance but still divided in intent. Eyes tracked her every movement. The man who had once trained Hawk stood silent, jaw locked, a muscle twitching near his temple. No orders came, no guns fired. They all waited. She looked at the insignia, black, stitched, stained. Once a brand of authority, then a brand of fear. And now, in her hand, a question. She didn't raise her voice, but it carried. "This cloth burned my family's home. It marked the gate before the fire came. It told the men who followed orders where to point their rifles." She paused, holding it higher still. "But this is not who I am." The crowd leaned in. Breath held. She stepped forward, knelt, and laid the insignia in the flames. The fire took it greedily. Smoke coiled up like a ghost finally leaving the earth. "It's not what I carry," she said. "It's what I choose." Silence. Then, from the far line of soldiers, a man dismounted. Young, unsure, but with purpose in his gait. He stepped forward, unclipping something from his coat. A metal pin, silver, marked with rank. He stared at it a moment, then let it fall into the dust. Another followed. This one holstered his weapon, turned his horse slightly, not away, but no longer aimed forward. One of the townsmen, a blacksmith with soot-stained hands, nodded once and crossed the line between the two factions, standing behind her. The fracture widened, until only one still moved with malice. The marshal's son. He stepped forward, drawing as he came, slow, deliberate, eyes locked not on her but on Hawk. "I knew you'd fold," he spat. "All that talk of vows, of protection, and now you kneel to her?" He raised the pistol. Hawk moved not fast, not with the trained reflex of a soldier, but with the certainty of a man who no longer cared if he lived or died so long as she didn't bleed for his sins. He stepped in front of her, knelt. No weapon drawn, no command issued. Just a vow, spoken again, quiet as the wind. "I protect, even from myself." The marshal's son hesitated. Something in the stillness struck him harder than any threat could have. Maybe it was the crowd now watching him, unarmed. Maybe it was the fire still burning that cursed symbol to ash. Maybe it was the look in Hawk's eyes, no rage, no plea, just acceptance. His hand trembled. The pistol lowered. He turned and walked away, the dust swallowing his steps. The judgment was not declared, it was simply done. And in the space where vengeance had stood, something else rose instead, earned, quiet and final.